Kim Scribner here with the Fault Line. I've got a guest with me today, an old friend, Aniela Larson, joining us back. She's been on some previous episodes as well. And we're here having a short conversation today about maybe a debate that we started over a LinkedIn post that Aniela had put up a couple of weeks back. So I'll ask you to talk about that a little bit, Aniela, and then we'll dive in.
For sure. Yeah. And as I stated in the post, this is not a dig at the book Radical Candor. I loved the book and I love the premise and I love the idea. The LinkedIn post was really getting at, can we be radically candid when the ecosystem that we are in does not support radical candor? In the sense that the book was written by Kim Scott, who worked for Google and Apple at a snapshot in time where those organizations were great representations of psychological safety, growth, kind of forward thinking. Can that really be used or leveraged in an organization that might be government or that might be really heavily regulated, where there's a lot of hierarchy? So let's get into it, Kim. I'm curious.
Yeah. So, whenever somebody says something like, oh, radical candor is not a good idea. So I immediately go into like defensive mode, not only because I share the name with the author, but because I have had folks in the past say to me, radical candor is an excuse for being an a-hole. And I don't agree with that premise. Similar to Kim Scott, Brene Brown talks about clear as kind. And I think radical candor is something that we're missing. And I actually do agree with you, Aniela, that the climate that we're in, maybe you're in Canada, I'm in the US, certainly in the US, the climate that we're in is tense, maybe. And we're a little bit afraid to be direct, even when the situation calls for it.
I mean, that's loaded on so many levels. So
Yeah, give it to me.
But what you're speaking about, I think, is psychological safety across the board. Like, does the climate, does our national climate support being truthful and real and unfiltered in a way that's not going to hurt us? And if we don't trust that or believe that to be true, then we don't have psychological safety to be candid, to state how we feel or offer any opportunities for change.
Yeah. So we've all been in situations where we're in a meeting room, whether that's virtual or live, we say something and that something is shot down and that creates that lack of psychological safety. I want to ask you briefly about the work that you do with Project Corporate Trauma and how the concept of radical candor kind of plays in that space for you.
Oh my gosh. I did not get this question ahead of time, so I'm not necessarily prepared to answer it. Look,
You're good on this one. You got this.
I think it's important to understand what corporate trauma is and or organizational trauma, workplace trauma to begin with, to then be able to answer that question. So with a really quick introduction, corporate, organizational, workplace trauma is a result of unmitigated psychosocial harm that goes on over a period of time and belongs to the complex trauma family. With that, you get into power imbalance. Power imbalance is a very real, almost feature of most organizations today. If we have a leader, we will have direct reports. What can we say to our leaders? Can we be radically candid? If our leaders are radically candid with us, how does that land? And so that kind of goes back to the comment about people who might not agree with radical candor because they equate it with being a complete dick.
Yeah. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. So I think,
So
like, for me, part of why I asked you about Project Corporate Trauma is because what I think is that sometimes the word trauma can be overused. So when you described corporate trauma, you described it as over a long period of time, not one comment that somebody made to you, right? So it's important that we create environments of psychological safety so that we don't get into the prolonged period of time. And there's probably like 6 episodes of a podcast we could talk about on how to do those things. But being radically candid in a moment is not corporate trauma. Is not going to create it.
and I think there's a caveat that is important to state because um, can it re-traumatize?
Mm.
Right? Can a comment re-traumatize? Trauma is such an individual experience-based thing
Yeah.
that lives in your body where we don't necessarily control it. And so it is difficult to say or state that this causes trauma.
Right.
We can't, and I don't think that's what I want to do. Um, I do think it is important, however, and for leaders in organizations when they are trying to give feedback that is constructive, that we consider, you know, as per radical candor, care personally,
Mhm.
challenge directly. Clear is kind. Does that mean that the way the person is going to receive it that is going to be that way? I don't know. That's out of a lot of scope of control. Um,
Right.
can we mitigate for all instances of misperception or misunderstanding and how something lands and it potentially being re-traumatizing? I don't think so. I don't think that we should. I don't think that's the goal.
Yeah.
I think if
So
we operate, yeah,
can we talk about, so you talked about the 2 dimensions that Kim Scott talks about in the book. Let's dive into the 2 of them for a minute each here. So care personally for me means you're not you might not be providing feedback based off of your own personal interests, but you're caring based off of the interests of the goal you're trying to accomplish as an organization. And so it's within the context of something that maybe you've already aligned on. Maybe there's some misalignment, but it's caring personally about the things that you're trying to achieve with the team you're managing. How does that
100%.
resonate with you?
No,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so I read another LinkedIn post, I think a few nights ago, about sports teams and
Mm.
coaches. Because if you think about coaches, are the coaches that we remember and like respect the most the ones that are like, oh, you did a great job, but don't actually
Mhm.
help you improve? Or are the coaches the ones that are
No.
kind of like,
The ones that gave me the most direct feedback are the ones I remember, yes.
I'm going to make you run sprints because it's in service of our winning. I'm going to,
Right.
have us do this thing together, even though we've done it 35,000 times. We're not doing it exactly in the way that we want to. Let's keep going. It's not, yeah, care personally to me is that I care about our shared outcome, our shared goal. And in that, I'm going to sometimes put that as the thing over, not instead of, over every individual
Yeah.
person.
Yeah. At the end of the day, we all work for organizations that have multiple types of stakeholders that they are accountable to, right? So, while we do care about the human beings, we are there for a purpose, and the caring is about the purpose, I think, is what we're getting to.
And about the people. So it's for me, it's a yes and 100%. I care about our goal and I care about the people who are helping us get there. I am going to prioritize the goal in this care personally context. And and this is where I think it is important to kind of return to. It's not licensed to just be
Right.
a blunt,
Yeah.
non-caring individual.
Yeah.
We have to be.
Yeah. What about challenge directly? So this is something that, in our course of working together, we've actually talked a lot about. When you've said to me, "You're very direct, Kim," and I've said to you, "You're good at not being as direct as I am sometimes when that's what the situation calls for." And so, to me, challenging directly means being specific about what the issue is. Because when we
Mhm.
talk in generalities, when we're providing guidance or feedback, it's too easy for something to get lost in translation.
100%. And we've also talked about this in previous episodes where we are narrative creating creatures. We're going to tell ourselves stories based off of the information that we receive, whether or not the information is provided in that way, our brain is going to make up a story that goes along with it. So that challenge directly requires specificity so that we minimize the expansiveness of the story that we're going to tell ourselves. So that really is the kindest thing that we can do.
Yeah. And so when we're challenging directly, some of the ways that I've coached leaders in doing that is have data so that you can show evidence of what you're challenging. Also, go in with an open mind because even though you're challenging something directly, you still might be wrong. And so, be curious in that challenge.
Oh, how many times have I heard you actually in our work with clients say, you know, a really good way of framing this is help me understand.
Yes. Yes. That is one of my go-to lines for sure.
So
Yeah.
maintaining that curiosity, absolutely, because we might be telling ourselves a story as well.
Yes. Yeah. So we've covered Kim Scott, we've covered a little Brene Brown, we've covered crucial conversations and the stories we tell ourselves all in a very short few minutes here today. What would be kind of one or two things that you would want to leave listeners with in terms of how to deploy radical candor in their organizations?
I'm going to do this with a little anecdote, if that's
Okay.
okay. So I was
Perfect.
once coaching an individual where I had to give some difficult feedback. Um, the best way that I could see that happening because I knew that the individual wasn't going to be, I mean, difficult feedback, difficult conversations are difficult because they're difficult, right? Like,
Yes.
let's not beat around the bush. It is difficult to have that conversation. It is difficult to receive that information. And yet when we think of feedback as the kindest thing that we can do for a person, like feedback is a gift that we don't get enough of. I framed it as massively empathetic. I came in with tons of space and understanding around this is difficult. And I stated to the individual, it is difficult for me as well in this conversation to give you this feedback because it is uncomfortable. Um,
Mhm.
that actually helped the conversation, that helped the individual receive it because it didn't
Yeah.
feel like an attack.
So naming it basically, which another peer of ours, Sarah Clark, who we'll name drop her today, always used to remind us on projects we worked with together to name the emotion you're feeling basically when you go into those conversations.
Yes, that is powerful. Very powerful. What about you, Kim? I'm curious. What is your like?
So to me, I more recently, so in my older years, have come to actually just say, I'm about to be really direct and I'm sorry if it sounds harsh. So
Mhm,
I almost like I preface the directness
mhm.
with that because especially when we're working in transformation spaces, we don't work for the organization a lot of the time. And people are dealing with a lot of change. So they're on super unstable ground and they're
Yes.
hearing from people who are not their direct managers in some cases. And so naming that, so it is still naming it, but it is
Mhm.
naming directness is coming, brace yourself.
Yeah.
And I think the other kind of go-to move or things that I coach leaders to do is explain why you're asking a question or why you're concerned about the situation. So
Mm-hmm.
put it in context for the
Mm-hmm.
individual, and that will, in my experience, have a much more fruitful conversation overall.
Trauma-informed practice.
Yeah.
I mean, there's way more to it, but that's one component.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Aniela, it's been great having you here today. For our listeners, you can find us on YouTube and wherever else you get your podcast. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Fault Line.
Thank you, Kim.